when I was growing up, I was always stuck with Raphael, and they're like, well, you have the same attitude, so you should be Raphael. Well, because in the game, the size, just you have to be so close compared to like Michelangelo's got the better reach. There's the very
I didn't know why you were stuck with him. Did you have like dominant friends that told you, no, I'm being Donnie, I'm being Mikey, you have to be Raph? Is that what's happening?
I was I'm like my mother. I'm too much of a people pleaser, unfortunately. I like to give people what they want. Except when it comes to just not using kickers in fantasy, then you don't get what you want.
It's a Thursday. Welcome to Scoop City, presented by eBay. I'm James Palmer. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It's internet. You have to say it. But please, also, if you're watching, please like and subscribe. We have a lot to get to today on a Thursday. As I mentioned, we're going to get a Bears report. We're going to dive in deep with Kevin Fishbain. We're going to talk about everything. Is the sky falling? I don't know. Is things, maybe overreacting? It happens in Chicago, but we'll find out how much so. And then we'll get with Nick Kosmider to talk about the Denver Broncos, one of the most hyped teams during the preseason, but took one on the chin against the Colts, and then will be facing a divisional foe in the red-hot Chargers this weekend. That's a big deal. And then Jake Seeley's going to give us all sorts of fantasy information like he always does, and probably some other nonsense. I think he's talking video games, arcade games. We may get into that with Kevin Fishbain as well, as he's going to join us right now, and we're going to talk a lot of Bears. Do you have a favorite arcade game, Kevin, that I can tell Jake later in the show?
Oh, man. The old Simpsons game.
That's on his list. That's like in his top
the
five.
Simpsons game.
Yes.
And I think there was a Ninja Turtles one, too. You're just those games where you're just going from left to right.
I don't want to give anything away.
Ninja Turtles.
I don't want to give anything away, but Ninja Turtles is extremely high on his list. You guys have very similar arcade game tastes. I know everybody wants to talk about Caleb Williams, and we will get to him. But to me, I'm more fascinated from a organizational standpoint of what you've seen with Ben Johnson so far. We have seen very few coaches that are as highly sought after as Ben has been over the last couple of seasons. Can I have something maybe like in this short window that you've had with him that maybe makes you scratch your head and go, I thought we were getting blank, and so far we have this, and then maybe something that's, this exceeded actually what I thought I'd have in Ben running the show here in Chicago?
Well, James, we spent 6 to 8 weeks writing about how this guy was maniacal about the details.
Yes.
And I do think he still is. But to see the Bears in 2 games have false start penalties, have, just not being on the same page on all 3 phases to the level that it's been, has not reflected a coach who is supposed to lead this program and have everyone follow him and just being so focused on the details. So I think that's been a little, and again, I don't know, we're all still trying to figure out the reasons for that. We're also trying to remind ourselves it's only been 2 games, but that's been a little bit of a, we saw this looked great. This looked like a change, and it hasn't been reflected on the field. I will say you can just sense the edge that he has. There's a competitive fire that makes you think that they will get out of this rut and that they will get into a groove at some point. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know when that's going to be. But there is this like throughout the summer, James, when anybody asks me about the Bears, and I still believe this, I tell them, I go, my number one source of optimism, or what your number one source of optimism should be as a fan, is Ben Johnson. Like, that's what it should be. I still believe in that. I think that we're seeing the play calling, I think, has been there. But, it just hasn't lined up yet, obviously, these first 2 weeks.
Listen, that edge is important, honestly, especially when you have a slow start, especially when you have a locker room that's curious if this is the guy. And I think having that edge is extremely valuable. Another one on Ben real quick before we move on, because this popped into my head, and I've talked to so many guys across the league that have been first-time head coaches and about their first year. How is he at delegating? Because oftentimes when you're really, really bright, like Ben is, and you're very attached to the details and you want everything done and you have a specific vision, sometimes delegating can be hard. How has that been so far with Ben?
Well, I think one thing he's talked about is coming from Dan Campbell. that was something he really respected from Dan. Remember, Dan Campbell's not calling plays there on either side of the ball. He's just overseeing everything. Now, Ben is calling plays here, but I think from Dan Campbell, he learned about delegation. He brought Antoine Randall over, who's the assistant head coach here, coaches the wide receivers. He brings over someone in Dennis Allen who, look, the defense had a disaster on Sunday, but I think we can all agree Dennis Allen is, if you're looking for a defensive play caller, he's on that short list of guys that you'd want calling a defense. So I do think that Ben Johnson coming from Dan Campbell, and remember, Dan Campbell comes from the Sean Payton tree, and there's a bunch of Sean Payton guys who are here. So I think you have this, you have good elements of coaches who have been successful through delegating. So, but look, Ben Johnson admitted to us after week 1 that he threw a challenge flag he shouldn't have thrown. He should have listened to the guys in his booth that were telling him, don't throw it. So the head coaching things are something to learn. But I will say this, James. Head coach taking accountability is a little bit of a new thing in Chicago. So the Bears might be 0-2, but fans are so excited they have a coach who will actually point the thumb about certain things.
Yeah, you're right. There were a lot of, and I'm not going to throw him under the bus, but maybe I'm doing it saying it. There was a lot of Matt Eberflus press conferences on a Monday where there was still a lot of head scratching and not a lot of answers for you specifically in your group when you were coming out of that press conference. So I bring up Flus, and there was somewhat of a revenge game for Ben Johnson going back and facing the Lions. Now you have maybe it's Matt Eberflus's revenge game against his former team. Is that talked about at all in the building? Because I don't want to say it because maybe it'll happen, but if you have this defense that has been struggling in Dallas right now come out and play brilliantly against your offense, that can be. That's not avoidable by any sense from what you're going to write.
Yeah, it's so two things at play here. And what I appreciated that Ben kind of answered the question on Wednesday with candor about, someone said, hey, Eberflus knows Caleb Williams intimately. He knows a lot of the players you have here. And Ben Johnson said, hey, we have a lot of coaches here who know him, who know his tendencies, who know the way he's wired. So it's going to be this chess match. Caleb Williams didn't really want to, he was very diplomatic about it. He said every game's a chess match, and, he was not going to get into the fray. But shoot, when the fourth quarter was devolving in week 1, and I looked ahead to the schedule and was like, all right, now they have to go to Detroit to play a motivated Lions team.
Yep.
And after that, I thought to myself, okay, what is worst case scenario? Worst case scenario, James, is 0-3, and Matt Eberflus is a big reason for it because his defense that hasn't played well stymies Caleb Williams and the Ben Johnson offense. Can you imagine this city? It'd be one thing to be 0-3. It's another thing to be 0-3 and it's because of Eberflus, the guy who has been torched in this city, fairly or not. For what happened during his time here. And look, you and I are talking Thursday morning. Eberflus talks at some point to Dallas reporters today. I know him well enough to know he is going to be very just straightforward, and it's just another game to him. And sure, he has memories, and he's got people here he is excited to see, all that stuff. He is a competitor. He is going to be designing the game plan of his life, I would imagine, for this one. So, yeah, it's a real thing. I do think that the coaches and players know well enough to know not to think about that. They just have to attack him and attack this Dallas team. But it is, in our world, James, we can talk about this scenario that is going to set off talk radio on Monday if the worst case happens.
Yeah, and you and I both know, Kevin, that he's going to say everything right at the podium. That's going to be very different than what's said in the locker room or the speech to the team on Saturday by whoever's getting in front of the group about Flus and about the way that they want to win this for him. You know what goes on behind closed doors. And we also know that there might be a game ball handed from Shoddy to Matt Eberflus if they do end up winning that game. That is just all worst case scenario for Bears fans right now. So let's try to think a little bit of positivity here. This could be a get right game for Caleb Williams and this offense when we talk about the struggles this defense in Dallas has, whether it's the pass rush, whether it's covering on the back end. I mean, you could kind of pick your spot you want to talk about. What have you seen from Caleb that gives people hope? The stats, strangely enough, are almost absolutely identical from last year to this year through the first two games. But what have you seen that's different in a quarterback through two games?
Look, I thought he made some throws in Detroit that were phenomenal. And our colleague Ted Wynn here did a film breakdown showing the improvement from week 1 to week 2. And yes, the score was bad. And yes, the defense and special teams have regressed with Mike Sando touchdown in his story on Monday. But Caleb Williams himself, you could see the footwork was better. He was making better reads. And actually, you go back to week 1 even, like the accuracy is a problem. But if you're looking for a solace, he was throwing to the right guys. It wasn't like he was forcing the ball in certain places. I thought he was like, people were so frustrated because he was missing open players. Well, those guys were open, which means A, they're being schemed open, B, they're getting open, and C, he's finding them. So those are good things. So I did think that he took a step forward in week 2. I compare this to my very below average golf game.
Okay.
Like,
tell me about it.
I'm not a good golfer.
Oh,
and I've always thought if I could just get rid of the awful tee shots, I could play a little bit.
Yeah, if I could just drive my cart and just start maybe in the middle of the fairway and just say that was my tee shot.
Nice?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like Caleb needs to get those things out of his system. He needs to get, whether it's the airmail throw, whether it's he had the thing in Detroit where he's scrambling and just kind of flings it downfield and it's an interception. He can't do those things. Like he's got to get those things out of his system. And once those are, and they're never going to be completely gone. We see Josh Allen make mistakes. We see Patrick Mahomes make mistakes, but you have to be more consistent. So I do think that we're seeing steps forward. And the thing that James, you always fall back on with this guy is the physical talent is out of this world.
It really is.
And you'll sit there, you'll see him overthrow a guy by 10 yards one play, and the next play he threads the needle, and you're like, how did he do that? So it's all about harnessing the good, trying to get rid of the really bad, and getting again. And the other thing too, James, one more thing on Caleb is it would really help to get this run game going. And I know that's such in the NFL world, we talk about that every week. Got to run the ball. And it's so true with this Bears team because Ben Johnson wants to run the ball. I mean, you talk about Jared Goff all you want. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery were a massive reason the Lions were so successful the last couple of years. If the Bears could just get into a rhythm, run the football, and keep the game into a situation where they can get the run going, I think that makes things a lot easier for Caleb.
I think it does too. And the other thing that's jumped out at me, and I'm curious what you think, is kind of some of this pre-snap stuff, all this motion that they're using, and some of the issues they're having before the ball's even snapped. I kind of equate that similarly, honestly, to watching a lot of Bo Nix early last year. I know Caleb's in year 2, but this is a new system with Ben Johnson. It was a new system with Sean Payton running things with Bo Nix, and it was like 1,000 personnel groups are coming in and out every single play for Bo Nix, and it was like, is this too much for the rookie? And it was too much early on, right? And then you saw like Sean not ease up on it and stayed with it. And by the end of the year, Bo Nix is handling all of it very, very well. And I'm kind of curious how that process is going to be for Caleb as the course of the year goes on with some of the stuff that Ben wants to put on his plate and figure out a way they want this offense to actually move. I want to get to an article that you wrote, I believe, about some of the tight ends here in town. And make sure you go to The Athletic and check that out because I loved it. And it got me thinking about how this team is built. There's talent, but there's a lot more to team building than just talent, right, Kevin? So like using your article and the 2 tight ends they have, is this team built properly? Like in how it was put together?
When Kelvin Banks went to the Saints at number 9, we're always going to sit here and wonder if he would have been the guy for the Bears at number 10.
Okay.
And what difference that would have made if you had drafted your left tackle for the next 10 years there. And you don't have to go through a left tackle competition like the Bears went through. You don't have to have as many worries as they do. And you go find a tight end later. But that didn't happen. And Colson Loveland's there. So now you have your 2 tight ends. You have Ben Johnson, who loves a 2 tight end. The Bears have run more 2 tight end plays than anybody in the league, and they're 23rd in targets. And that would drop to like 28th if you took out the garbage time targets. So something's not aligning. And Ben Johnson took some blame for it. Caleb Williams took some responsibility for it. But you're right when you look at the fact that what Ryan Poles did this offseason was he said, I need to fix my interior, so I'm just going to spend the money to do it. And good on him. Joe Thuney, Jonah Jackson, Drew Dahlman. In terms of guys who you could acquire, you couldn't have asked for like a better triumvirate to come in here. But the problem is you had to go do that because you hadn't done it. Like you hadn't developed guys. You hadn't had guys in there. You've got these tackles that you drafted it'd be a great situation if those guys are playing a high level. But it hasn't gotten there yet. So that, like, how can you get these tight ends involved if you don't have the pass protection? How can you get the run game going if you're not doing X, Y, and Z? How can you allow Caleb the time to get the deep passing game going if your tackles or something's off? And you talked earlier about new scheme. It's new scheme for everybody. So all those things in play, like, there has been a lot of consternation this week in the city about the fact that the Bears had multiple second-round picks either inactive or very uninvolved. And you can argue that it takes rookies time, and they have other guys who couldn't play those spots, but also, like, that's resources you're spending. And this is not a rebuild. This is a team that needs to be competing for a wild card now. So it's it's going to be an interesting situation of GM and head coach and how these guys kind of, you want them to obviously be aligned at the hip and everything, but when you're 0-2 and you're 0-2 the way that you're 0-2, you open the door for every bout of criticism. Like, the Bears have just put themselves in this position for us to kind of sit here and be like, well, maybe you should have drafted this guy. Maybe you should have traded for this guy. Maybe you shouldn't have paid this guy. Maybe you shouldn't have extended the GM. Like, that's kind of the top of the, of the list in terms of what everyone's talking about. But again, you're 0-2. They get it. Like, this is the stuff that's going to come up.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I look at the secondary that's been banged up, and you're going against George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb, and Dak is playing as good as anybody. So real quick, before we go, what prediction for Sunday is what?
The Bears don't win shootouts. They haven't won a shootout in a really long time.
I thought you were going to say that. And they've been giving up explosive plays.
Yeah, it's like, I have no reason to think that Dallas is not going to score 30. Like, the Bears haven't given me reason to think that based on what they've done in the last 5 quarters of football. Mm-hmm. I do think that this could be an opportunity for them, though. So you know what? Let's go Bears 32, Cowboys 29. I like to try to find scoregami-esque scores.
Yeah, I was about to ask you that.
And let's think, like, you know what I'm going to do, James? I don't want to say one last chance, but I'm going to give the coaching staff this. I'm going to say, we've talked so much about how great Ben Johnson is and Dennis Allen. This is their opportunity to show it because they need a win. So I will give them the credit that we've been giving them all summer and say that they find a way to get these guys. It would be the Bears' first, like, shootout win in several years.
Okay, you're calling it. I appreciate it. Kevin, thank you so much for the time. Everybody go and read that article about Cole Kmet and Colston Loveland and what's kind of going on in the offense. I think it's a nice little microcosm of kind of what's happening right there. So appreciate you joining us. We'll have you back soon, hopefully after a win, and we're not talking as much of 0-2 stuff and what's happening in Chicago.
Thanks, James.
All right, appreciate that from Kevin Fishbain. And we going from an 0-2 team to a 1-1 team, maybe the darling of the offseason, specifically in the AFC. That was the Denver Broncos. A lot of sleeper picks going out there for Sean Payton's group. I think he was kind of the one spearheading all of that, but it hasn't been exactly what we thought out of the gate, specifically on the offensive side of the ball, maybe a little bit on the defensive side as well, as they get their hearts broken against the Indianapolis Colts in week 2. And now they have a monster game in week 3 in the division against the red hot Chargers. And that's why we bring in my buddy. I see this guy in the flesh regularly. I'm not sure if that was appropriate to say, but Nick Kosmider joins Scoop City right now. Nick, what's happening, man?
I'm doing good, James. How are you, man?
I'm good. I mean, this show has kind of ruined the amount of time we can see each other. We both live in Denver. I like to pop into the Broncos here or there, and maybe Fridays are the only time I can do it because of this show, but that's okay.
That's okay. The best time, man. Vibes are good on Fridays. Hayes in the barn. Everybody's a little more chill.
Well, we can talk about that offline.
It's chill as a Sean Payton team.
Yeah, I was about to say that. But you keep us informed all week long. I think one of the things that I wanted to start off with this, and if you've gotten this vibe in the locker room at all, is Sean has built a culture very, very quickly. We know that from guys that probably hadn't even won enough to even have the confidence that they've had over the last 2 years, but they do. But the expectations were so high heading into this season to make sure that doesn't change. I felt like this week is a big week for the coaching staff to make sure that that's still ingrained into this team after the way things went in week 2. How have you seen that? Because that's a little bit of Sean's magic sauce, I think.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it. And you talked about the expectations. It was really, Sean Payton, the head of that coaching staff, who kind of amped those up, right? When he shows up to training camp and starts talking about this team being one that he thinks has what it takes to, have a chance to compete for the Super Bowl, right? And so he kind of elevated that both from a team perspective and then talking about where he thinks Bo Nix can be in the next 2 years as one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And so, there comes with that some pressure, particularly from the one that is setting those expectations that they're going to be able to elevate this team in a way that allows them to compete at that level. And what they have to do is be able to clean up some of the things that have cost them in these close games. Like we have seen this team, to your point, James, because of the culture, because of like just the better foundation of the personnel and all those other things, take this ride. But if you look to the start of last year, they're now 2-7 in 1-score games. And in a lot of these, like Sundays in Indianapolis, there was just kind of an avalanche of self-inflicted mistakes that kept them from winning that game. And Sean's big thing has been, like, before we can learn to win these games, we have to learn how to not lose them. And that's, I think, kind of really the focus right now of like, can we get out against a good team and play the kind of clean football game you have to play in order to give yourself a chance?
Yeah, and I think that there was enough blame to go around. I know everybody talks about Will Lutz and that curveball somehow he kicked and goes off an upright, but there's a lot of blame to go around about the reasons why they didn't come away with a W leaving Indianapolis, because it was almost in all three phases, in all honesty. And you mentioned Bo and the expectations, and they're through the roof, honestly. I mean, if Jaden Daniels doesn't have the rookie season that he had, which was essentially one for the ages, I think Bo Nix is clearly the rookie of the year, and he actually beat Jaden Daniels out in a lot of metrics in this rookie season. But it hasn't been as smooth, maybe, as we all kind of expected. Coming out of the gates in 2 weeks. What have you seen from Nix? Because you were there every day at training camp. Like, that maybe this is kind of making me scratch my head, or this is what I saw in camp and I'm getting exactly what I expected.
Well, I think what's kind of interesting is that even though you have like a lot of what was talked about was the continuity, right? Like Bo Nix, for the first time since he was in high school, was getting to go into the same offensive system under the same play caller, same quarterbacks coach, all that stuff for the second year in a row. Never had that in college at either of his 2 stops, 5 different schemes. And so that was sort of where you expected the automatic growth to be. And I think in some ways we do see that. I think just sort of his general comfort in the huddle, that's been evident when you talk to teammates. I think the kind of the way that he plays, off platform and that kind of thing is still, I think he's still comfortable in that ways. What's been different is I think they are still trying to figure out who they want to feature in this offense and ultimately what they want it to be. I mean, you've had back-to-back games now where, for week 1 against the Titans, 11 different receivers catch passes. Week 2 against the Colts, 10 different receivers catch passes. And Evan Ingram, who is supposed to be kind of like a pivotal part of this, has not really been one of those guys. So I just think they're still mixing in so much of this, not to say nothing of the fact that you have 2 new running backs, kind of an altered run scheme that you're doing now. So even though there was continuity, what I've seen is like they are still in a way kind of figuring out who they ultimately want to be offensively.
Yeah, and that's a tough one when you go against a Jesse Minter defense in week 3 that in the secondary is about as complex and amoeba-like as you can see in the NFL, right? The way guys move around and maybe show you one thing and then give you something else. And I think that's going to be the interesting aspect of it. You brought up Evan Ingram, which is fascinating to me. I predicted him to be second on this team in catches by the end of the year. Obviously, it's early, but that usage has been different. Is Troy Franklin the one that's emerging compliments of Cortland Sutton in this passing game? I felt like Indianapolis was essentially the coming out party for Troy Franklin in year 2.
Yeah, and I think at this point, like, because you were out there, James, for a lot of training camp and saw him kind of taken off in the way that he has. I think what has struck me about Franklin is like none of it really since, the OTA program has been like a flash in the pan. He's been consistent every single day to the point where I think you can say like, this is who he's become. And there's still plenty of room, for growth for him. But just his confidence level is on a different plane than it certainly was a year ago. And I think it's just continuing to grow. You can do different things with him. I asked Sean Payton about him yesterday, kind of the biggest thing that he's seen in terms of, technique, because he had mentioned during training camp that Franklin's gotten stronger and clearly just has a better understanding of the playbook. But he said his ability to kind of be a run after the catch threat the way that we want to use him is a real difference maker. I mean, even you mentioned Will Lutz's missed 42-yarder. They only were able to attempt a field goal after two big penalties because Franklin, catches a screen and turns nothing into a 15-yard gain. So he's been a really important element. It's just now, can you find something else that you can consistently count on? We haven't seen the running backs in the passing game a whole lot. That was supposed to be a staple of what they're doing. So I just think they're still throwing a lot against the wall right now is probably the easiest way to say it.
Okay. Well, we'll see what Sean can figure out. He usually finds a way to figure out. So we'll wait and see as he does throughout the early portion of this season. On the other side of the ball, this was just a defense that was really, really good last year. And then you add Talanoa Hufanga on the back end, and they've been in love with his emergence already. I won't say it's emergence. He's a veteran, but like his role in this defense has been even more so when I talked to Vance Joseph than they maybe originally thought. Like he's been a lot in that backside. They still haven't seen Dre Greenlaw, which has been part of it. But to me, what stood out was the pressure that they put on Daniel Jones, and it just didn't seem to impact Daniel Jones, right? Like he didn't drop his eyes. He still was able to feel comfortable, at least from watching it. And then you look at the amount of pressure that they're bringing. They're blitzing over 51% of the time so far. That's number one in the NFL. I look at Justin Herbert. He's got the second highest passer rating in the NFL against the blitz. Is this a concern? This group up front, or do you have a concern anywhere on this defense? Because I think people saw them really come out in week one, play great, but we knew what the opponent was. And I think a lot of people were scratching their head after the Indy game.
Well, they still have to kind of show one of those sort of performances against a really good team. For as good as this defense was last year, if you look at the end of the season, they struggled a lot against Jameis Winston and Jerry Jeudy in that Cleveland game. Week 16 at the Chargers, especially in the second half, couldn't stop Justin Herbert. Obviously Cincinnati week 17 struggle against Joe Burrow and his weapons, which obviously a lot of people do. But I think they want to see that out of this defense. A lot of that, I think it was close to a 70% blitz rate against the Colts. And that got the Broncos burned a couple times. They gave up 4 plays of 40 or more yards. That's just completely uncharacteristic of a Vance Joseph defense. Because if you go back to the start of last year, the Broncos only give up explosive plays on about 10% of opponent dropbacks, and that's like 6th lowest in the league. They want to keep the lid over the top of this thing and then be able to beat you if you do get into the red zone, which is another thing that they've done well. So they need to stick to that formula. Like aggression is good, and it's a hallmark of what Vance Joseph does. But I think they have to be careful because you can win with that front four. I'm not super concerned about that group. But I just think picking their spots, especially against a guy like Justin Herbert, is going to be critical.
Okay, so before we bounce, Nick, is there buzz? Like, I can't believe the Chargers have 3 divisional games to start. They could be 3-0. Like, is there talk there of like, we got to win this game for us, but like the Chargers can start running away with this thing early on, sooner than later. Is there talk of that in the locker room? And then also, what's your prediction for Sunday?
Yeah, I think there is definitely a sense that this is a game that it is massive for this early of the season. When you looked at the Broncos schedule, this gauntlet starts with a road game at the Chargers. Then they host the Bengals on Monday Night Football in week 4. A little bit of a different complexion to that one now, of course, but then go to Philadelphia in week 5 to face the Eagles. So like, this is the start of a really critical stretch. And because you didn't get that win in Indianapolis that you really feel like you should have, it turns the screws on this game, not only because of where you are, but to your point, absolutely, the Chargers could be 3-0 with a win in hand against every team in the division if they win. Like that's, again, still early days, but that is, that you're already on the wrong end of tiebreakers and all those other sorts of things. So I think it's big. What I do think for the Broncos, I'm really curious to see like J.K. Dobbins in this game. He's had at least 60
revenge game,
at least 63 yards in each of these first 2 games. Like the Broncos did not have anybody kind of produce back-to-back those numbers last year. And I think he's starting to get going. They're going to continue to find ways to get RJ Harvey going. I see another really close game. Just can the Broncos avoid some of the pitfalls in those moments that they have had and finally get over the hump?
Okay. Back-to-back 60-yard rushing games. You know what they call those in 2025? They call him Patrick Mahomes rushing games because that's essentially, I believe, what he's done in the first 2 weeks. Nick, good chatting with you. Hopefully I see you in person tomorrow when I try and pop into to practice, man. Awesome. Great stuff. Coming up, we got Jake Seeley telling us everything we need to know about fantasy and apparently arcade video games. I'll explain that more on Scoop City, presented by eBay. Welcome back to Scoop City, presented by eBay on a Thursday, so you know what that means. Right dead here in the middle of the show, we got Jake Seeley, as always, the senior fantasy writer here at The Athletic with us. And Jake, before we get to our fantasy discussion, every year, well, maybe it's every year, every week you come with a different rankings from another topic outside of fantasy football. We had Kevin Fishbain on at the beginning of the show. I said, hey, we're going to talk arcade video games. Jake's favorites ranked. He gave me his favorite too. Do you want to hear what they were?
Sure.
He goes, well, Simpsons has to be near the top.
Okay.
And he goes, but my all-time favorite's Ninja Turtles.
There you go.
What is your number one on the list?
The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Unbelievable. You guys should go to an arcade together. Maybe drop some quarters in.
I was actually recently at one in New York where we played Turtles, and I was Michelangelo. When I was growing up, I was always stuck with Raphael, and they're like, well, you have the same attitude, so you should be Raphael. Well, because in the game, the size, you have to be so close compared to like Michelangelo's got the better reach. There's the very
true. I didn't know you were stuck with him. Did you have like dominant friends that told you, no, I'm being Donnie, I'm being Mikey, you have to be Raph? Is that what's happening?
I'm like my mother. I'm too much of a people pleaser, unfortunately. I like to give people what they want. Except when it comes to just not using kickers in fantasy, then you don't get what you want. Don't do it.
Yeah, 100%. Is there anybody else on the list that you want to drop down? I think this is a great list. I'm looking at all of it. I like that you have some old schoolers on there as well, whether it's Frogger or whether it's Gallico, whatever it is. Pac-Man's still on there. I don't think you like Bose, so no Miss Pac-Man. I saw Street Fighter 2 on here. That was literally my college roommate throughout all of our time together. He would go to an arcade like all day on Saturday because he didn't care about college football and just play Street Fighter 2 nonstop. I think he's doing it in Mexico City right now, probably as we speak. Anything on here you want to make a stance on just to make sure that people at home know?
I don't think Burger Time gets enough respect. Burger Time, I think, is better than Donkey Kong.
18.
More fun. Yeah. So Crazy Taxi, you'll always find me at Crazy Taxi playing that game. Okay. It's one of my favorites. The one I do want to give a shout out, and this is a humble brag, but it's not a humble. It's just a brag. I played 2-on-2 and I played 2-on-2 on NBA Jam with a buddy while I was in New York, and the joystick would not go to the right, and we still won because we're that good.
Wow, that is a good brag. I'm just going to call it a brag, not a humble brag. That's a brag.
Yeah.
I'll use a brag. My buddy Steve Smith, who's I think on his way to the Hall of Fame, has NBA Jam at his house in Charlotte, and we've played a number of times to each other.
Well, do you have the arcade one-up cabinet? Or is that what you're talking about?
He has the full arcade. Yep, the whole deal.
Yeah, I got the thing sitting right over here. I have the smaller one, the big version of the smaller one.
He's got the big version. Yeah, no big deal.
He's also Steve Smith.
Yeah, very good point. Let's get to our fantasy discussion. Steve's not playing anymore, although I used to use him in fantasy all the time back in the day. What are we talking about now with a couple of these younger running backs? And are we weary of what's happening? We're talking about them in maybe two groups. And because two of them are playing against each other, we just had Nick Kosmider on, RJ Harvey and Omarion Hampton. Kind of, there were some high hopes in both spots, I think, about how these guys were going to perform. Haven't really seen it so far. What's your take?
So I'm more concerned about Harvey than as Barkley tries to come into the picture. We're not talking about you, Barkley.
Yeah, what's up, buddy?
So I'm more concerned about Harvey than I am Hampton. Harvey, the problem with Harvey is that J.K. Dobbins is just playing so good in front of him. Mm-hmm. And it is also Sean Payton. Sean Payton actually had 4 running backs on game day at times with the Saints. And this is what Sean Payton does. And honestly, outside of his 50-yard play, which got everybody excited for what Harvey can do, he's done very little. And, Dobbins hasn't been playing well. So unless Dobbins starts to get banged up or starts to teeter out,
which can happen.
It could happen. I mean, it's happened multiple times
for him. Yeah.
So I think Harvey's a timeshare piece at best. In fantasy, you can't use him right now. Hampton, I have less worry for, probably about half the worry, but he's been remarkably inefficient. My concern, and I wonder if you're seeing the same thing, I'm wondering if the offensive skill set doesn't fit the offense he's in, and the fact that he needs to be more one cut, and he's just, that lateral agility is just not there right now. I saw a little bit more of it at UNC, but I think the fit in the offense might be killing him, and it's part of why he's so inefficient. That being said, he's still getting 2 to the 3rd touches of Najee Harris. So I'm not overly concerned, but there's a little bit, as you can hear in the back of my mind.
Yeah, I can hear it in there. And the philosophy offensively has changed a little bit with the Chargers, and they're not shying away from that at all, right? Like, we're going to throw the ball more than we did a season ago with Justin Herbert, and obviously that can always play a part in it as well. I think there's just been a couple of brain farts early on for Omari Hampton too, and I don't think, running out of bounds or whether it's the fumble, but like, I do think there's an emphasis that they know that he's the type of back that if he keeps getting carries, it kind of snowballs with him sometimes, and I think that's part of the reason why they brought him in there. The other 2 backs, rookie-wise, that we want to look at are 2 of the ones that I think were maybe the most talked about in the draft process, and Ashton Jeanty and Travion Henderson. What happened in week 2 that makes you think a certain direction with both these guys? Because I think Henderson probably wants to just kind of like burn that tape that happened with him in week 2.
Deservedly so. So Jeanty, I have very little concern. Again, about half the concern I would have for Henderson. It's actually been part of the offensive line. He's one of 2 running backs in the NFL to average negative yards before contact, which is just telling how bad it is. But part of it is Jeanty coming from college too, and I know you've seen this, is I hate to tell you, Ashton, but not every play has to be 50 yards. Like, sometimes 4 is better than losing yards. And stop trying to, we're talking video games, stop smashing the B button and the juke button.
Yeah,
like,
just
it. Sometimes grind it out. It's okay. So I think this is going to be fine. He's still top 15 in touches. Jeanty will come around. It's just going to obviously take his getting his mind right. Henderson, it's twofold. Part of the problem is he's not getting the touches, but all of a sudden Stevenson looks like he did 2 years ago. Like, we had a really good start from Stevenson last year, and then he completely fell off. So much so that they turned to Antonio Gibson to start a game last year. But that being said, this looks like 2 years ago Stevenson. All that being said, I do still think there's a severe threat that Henderson comes for Stevenson in time, mostly because of that explosiveness. I still think they're going to use him in the passing game. I still go back to the James White days. We don't need Henderson to have 250 touches to be valuable in fantasy. So I'm less concerned than Henderson than Harvey, but obviously least concerned about Jeanty.
Yeah, when I'm not concerned about Jeanty. When Marshawn Lynch is a photographer for your game and then talks to you after the game about, finds your locker and says, hey, I want you to work on this, this, and this. I mean, that's arrows pointing up right there when you talk to Money Lynch. And then I did talk to some people in New England, and it was more of, the way Mike Vrabel works. You're going to have a couple holding penalties that are going to hurt us. You're going to pay for it pretty quickly. In the immediate, not in the long run, in the immediate, with the way Mike Vrabel works. And there were a couple plays he had that were called back by somebody else holding, actually, if you go back and watch that game. So that's part of it as well.
He was supposed to be one of the best pass blockers, if not the best in the class, and he's missed 2 really bad ones.
I've never heard a running back talked about like Travion Henderson in terms of pass protection in recent memory when I talk to evaluators out there with these teams. And so that's been a little bit of a head scratcher for them, for sure. How about some pass catchers that I would assume probably went pretty high in a lot of leagues. When you look at Brian Thomas Jr., who I think was 3rd in the NFL in receiving, A.J. Brown, one of the best receivers in all of football, and Drake London, who I believe was 4th in the NFL, or 5th, one of those 2 in receiving this past year. Those 3 receivers, what's wrong, and should people be panicking about some of the guys they probably took near the top of the draft?
So I'm not panicking for any of them. I'm buying low across the board. A.J. Brown is the most simple, and I think people already forgot last year. A.J. Brown and especially Devontae Smith were already inconsistent, where there'll be games where they just don't need him. The Eagles are that good. Yep. Barkley arrives last year, and it even turned double over. We actually had 6 single-digit performance from A.J. Brown. Oh, by the way, he had 2 games in the playoffs. We all remember that, where they kind of didn't need him in the one game where the 7 targets, they just weren't connecting, but it was fine, because the Eagles don't need to force the issue. This is what it is. So A.J. Brown will still get you 20-point games. He'll still be top 15 when we get to the end of the season. Buy low. London, same thing. Like, the opportunities have been there. They didn't need to pass last week. Like, we just saw how easily they ran all over him that game. So I'm buying low on London. But the biggest one I think is getting way too much hate is Brian Thomas. Like, I already watched the games, and I went back a second time. I'm like, all right, let me watch every single incompletion specifically. You know how many of them were Brian Thomas's fault out of the 14? 3. It was the one where he made the business decision, and he's not the first wide receiver to make a business decision across the middle of the field. And the other 2 where he turned up before really completing the pass. Of course, one of them was the touchdown. But of the other 11 incompletions, Trevor Lawrence is thrown into the back of defenders, the front of defenders, over Thomas's head. He's going to be fine. It's more on Trevor Lawrence than it is Brian Thomas. I think Brian Thomas is probably the most disrespected wide receiver right now, given everything that's happened through the first 2 weeks.
I think you're exactly right. I was, this is my humble brag now. I'm doing another one. I was on the radio in Toronto this week, and one of the hosts was like, hey, tell me about Brian Thomas Jr. I've never seen a receiver more scared going over the middle. What's going on here? And I'm like, I don't know. I actually hadn't really heard that about him. Even after that interview, I called a couple of people who were like, no, that's not really him. Like, he's a really good player. This is a new offense. This is a new system for everybody. It's just not clicking right now. There's a lot of reasons why it's not really clicking there. And I think you're right. Drake London, exactly spot on with the way that game plan was. What I am curious about, though, with him, and he's on one of my teams, is I'm trying to say this the right way. Okay, I'll say it nicely. Michael Penix Jr. thinks very differently of Kyle Pitts than Kirk Cousins did. Yes. If that is putting it politely. So I'm just kind of curious how the share is going to be around in that offense, because Kirk thought one way about Kyle Pitts. Michael Penix thinks a very different way about Kyle Pitts. So
I think it's twofold there. For one with London, it was you're never going to see 40% of the targets every single week. Like that, we knew that was going to come back. That was just Penix also getting comfortable in the NFL. The second part is, I don't think it's just also not the fact that he thinks differently, is that the Falcons, I'm watching these first 2 games, and I said, you know what? They realized that Pitts cannot separate. Let's try to stop making him run all these routes and see if he can. He can't. But what they've done in the first 2 games is they kind of turned him into a power forward. They're like, go run your route into the defender, spin off of him, you're open. Run into him, get him off his heels, you're open. And that's what they're doing. And that's what I really like about Kyle Pitts' usage so far, is they're understanding what NFL offenses should do across the board. Hey, maybe use a player the certain way. The Colts with Daniel Jones, they can only do certain things. Hone in on their strengths and eliminate the weaknesses. What a surprise. So I think London will be fine, but I think he's probably more of like, it's the Brian Thomas. Everybody that wanted Drake London to ascend to the Jamar Chase and CeeDee Lambs of the world just wasn't going to happen. So it's more of a perception than a reality.
Okay. I get it. I like Atlanta, though. I'm not gonna lie on that, Jake. I think they're actually,
those draft picks on defense are paying off.
Yeah, I love them. Really are.
We don't talk defenses, sneaky defense this week.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Right? Yeah. I dig it. Okay. All right. That's Jake Seeley. Make sure you read everything he does on The Athletic. It's outstanding. Coming up, we have my extra points. I cleared my throat because it's important. And I have an MVP pitch to make here on Scoop City as we close it out on a Thursday. Welcome back to Scoop City, presented by eBay on a Thursday as we close things out. As I mentioned, it's a Thursday, so that means my extra point. And I'd like to make an extra point here about Chargers quarterback Justin Herbert. The Chargers are 2-0, yet they haven't played a game on a Sunday yet, and have an opportunity to move to 3-0 against the Broncos this Sunday. Now, the last time they started a season 3-0, Drew Brees was the quarterback, and they were in San Diego, so it's only fitting that they have an opportunity to do that against Sean Payton, who was Brees' former coach. Now, the interesting part with Herbert is that they've unlocked something in him, and it's just because they're using the right keys to do it. That's making sure that they build this offense in year 2 with Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh to play to his strengths. Not to say he never did before, but now you're seeing a more aggressive Justin Herbert. They're telling him to use his legs more. He has 7 or more carries in both games this season. He's never done that in his career. They've encouraged it even throughout the course of this early portion of the season. But at the same time, they haven't made it more complex as they've gotten more aggressive downfield. It's simple reads, I'm told. It's simple schemes in a way in how they're operating, but also because he has a familiar face and Keenan Allen has returned, and the emergence of Quentin Johnston has now allowed the offense not to go entirely just through Ladd McConkey, which has kind of been, to my understanding, the way teams thought the focus was going to be. Now it's allowing the entire offense to work and operate even better. So we were always waiting for Justin Herbert to take that step, right? Last year, he protected the football brilliantly, just 3 interceptions through the course of the entire season. But now we're seeing him be more aggressive and impactful in the passing game downfield, using that big arm and still protecting the football, as he has 5 touchdown passes and no interceptions thus far. There's only 2 players in the history of the NFL that have more than 125 passing touchdowns in their first 5 seasons and no playoff wins. It's Justin Herbert, and the other one is Peyton Manning. But in year 6 for Peyton Manning, he led the NFL in passing, won the MVP, and won 2 playoff games. This is year 6 for Justin Herbert. We'll see if he can possibly do the same thing. All right. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for enjoying this Scoop City on a Thursday presented by eBay. Thank you for Kevin Fishbain. Thank you for Nick Kosmider. Thank you for Jake Seeley. I am James Palmer. That is everybody that we listed in the show, I think. Hope you enjoy your weekend of football, everybody.